So Final Fantasy XVI is without a doubt my most anticipated game right now and has been since it was announced. Now, with that being said, I haven't done a ton of content on it until recently, and I want to change that. I want to make a lot more Final Fantasy XVI content. For a long time, I've been a Souls channel now for the past 6 months or so. I've been a Dark Souls and Bloodborne channel. But Final Fantasy is my favorite series, and I want to change that up. So here are 5 things I do and do not want to see in Final Fantasy XVI. So, first thing I do want to see. I want to see a deep skill tree, but not feeling useless like the Avengers. Because too often nowadays do we see a skill tree that is presented like the Avengers, one that looks really deep, but it's very, very deceiving. 90% of the Avengers upgrades, despite looking like there's a ton that would make combat feel more fluent, are just useless. Because most of them are just, oh, it increases the range, increases the damage, yeah. Instead of actually giving you moves to fill in the holes that are in the combat system, it's just more useless things for the moves you already have. And while it looks deep upon first glance, it does a really, really terrible job of actually feeling like it adds anything to the combat. We've already heard from Yoshi P that we are going to be getting a deep combat system as well as a deep skill tree, but I just want this because, again, there are tons of games like the Avengers that have seemingly deep skill trees that actually end up meaning absolutely nothing. And the first thing I don't want to see, I actually do not want to see a job class system. I know it's blasphemy for Final Fantasy fans to say that, but here's the thing. Earlier in the year, we're already going to be seeing the release of Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. And whether or not that game interests you or not, it's redundant, but that game is already doing a job class system pretty well. From the trial versions I've played, it is doing a pretty good interpretation of the job class system. And with that, I do not want 16 to do the same exact thing. I don't. And I don't think they would anyways, because while the game is very action-based, it seems to be based around him just using his sword and fighting like a DMC character, which I'm fine with. But I definitely don't want to see some crazy job classes like, okay, I can be monk, or I can be dragoon, or I can be, pugilist, or no, I guess pugilist is a subtype of monk. I can be a duelist, right? I don't want that. I'm pretty sure the different roles will come with the icon's powers. We've already seen this in the trailer, actually. When you're using Titan's fists, you fight like a monk, or just like, the Devil May Cry gloves. But, Phoenix is just something that changes up your normal sword combat. It gives you just more moves. And with Bahamut, it just seemingly Bahamut. Okay, it could be Garuda, for all I know. But it changes up your air combat. So, I have a feeling that... I hate living in the South, dude. It's so terrible. But I have a feeling that you're going to get your semblances of other combat systems through the icons. For example, you may get like an ice lance that you can use somehow through the Shiva icon, or maybe through and you can get like a mage, like a pure mage style through Rama. Which, if they do job classes like that, I'd be totally fine with, because then job class goes with the story and it feels more fluent. But if it was to just be something like, okay, you have your job classes and then you have your icons that affects different things, at that point it would feel too overwhelming, and I would not like that. So if they want to go the route of job classes, mix it with the icons somehow instead of separating them, because if you mix it, then it has something that I really liked from a very different game, Spider-Man Web of Shadows, where the story complements the gameplay and vice versa. Your gameplay will influence the story, and what happens in the story will influence your gameplay options. And that is very much what I want. So I do not want to see a straight-up job class system. Just combining it with the icons somehow would probably work. Another thing I do want to see, and I've already touched upon this in its own video, I'll leave a link at the end, is exploration. I made an entire video on whether or not I think it would be open world. And I do want some exploration. I don't need this to be a massive, massive open world, but I do like to have some exploration in games. Things feel like they're too short and like they have less replayability if they're really linear. I don't need it to be as massive as, say, The Witcher 3, for example, where it takes so long to complete that I can barely finish a single playthrough. But I don't want it to be like hardcore linear, like Devil May Cry. But I'm not going to touch on this a ton because, like I said, I've made a full video on this already. But for sure, I do want some kind of exploration in it. Again, it doesn't need to be huge, but I just want to see a variety of locations in this massive fantasy world they've already created for us. And something else I don't want to see, and I'm very confident we won't see this, but I figured I'd bring it up anyways. I don't want to see an over-reliance on items to stay alive. This was a very, very big complaint with Final Fantasy 15, where pretty much, unless you're playing the DLC bonus fights that are available after the main DLC themselves, as long as you have items, you are immortal. You will never die. Never. You will never be able to lose. You will never, ever be in a situation where you have to seriously think, am I in trouble? And I do not want that here. And I'm pretty confident we won't, because again, the combat director is the guy that made Devil May Cry 5, one of the most amazing combat systems I've ever played, despite me being awful at it. I'm very confident we won't see this make a return, but I figured I would bring it up anyways, because there is really nothing that kills the flow of gameplay more than, oh, what's this? My entire team got, absolutely, I hate the South, got absolutely decimated by an unblockable attack that I could do nothing about. Time to have each of them individually use a Phoenix down to get them back up, right? There's nothing that kills the gameplay more than that. So that is a very big complaint of mine and something I do not want to see get carried over into Final Fantasy 16. So another thing I do want to see, now this is very much not important, but it is something. I would like to see a party of some kind, but it doesn't need to be like crazy, right? I don't need something like the bros in Final Fantasy 15. And they could simply be AI controlled, right? I don't even need to be able to give them techniques, just something to feel like I'm not just playing Devil May Cry, right? I just want something to where I don't just feel like it's Devil May Cry. And they don't all need to be playable, right? They can literally just be something like, oh, they're here, they have good AI and everything, they help you out, but I don't need to give them techniques, or I don't need to switch off to them constantly like you see in this FF7 remake footage, where I have to constantly switch off to fight Weiss. Like, I don't need something like that, and I don't need to have techniques like in Final Fantasy 15. That would be, I would take that, but I don't really need it. This very much seems like a focus story with Clive as the only main character, only main playable character, and I'm very much fine with that. But it would feel nice to not be completely alone in it, to make it feel less like Devil May Cry. And another thing I don't want to see this follow one of the few mistakes that The Witcher 3 made, which was excessive grinding. A very big issue I have with The Witcher 3 is the terrible balancing of XP. You get so little XP for anything you do. You could go destroy hordes of monsters, do everything in your power, wipe out the entire population in Vela, and you would get like maybe 200 experience. I do not want to see this issue come up in 16. Now 16 and The Witcher are obviously going to be very, very different games with completely different development staffs, not even close. But I do not want to see this game go down that same mistake that The Witcher 3 made with its XP problem. Because The Witcher 3 is amazing, yes, but the XP issue makes it tedious to play at some times. Which, you can kind of see why they did that, because the skill tree in The Witcher isn't really that important. It's not. But it still definitely is annoying to see something that you do want in the skill tree, and then know, okay, well, it's going to take me, let's see, 73 hours of gameplay to be able to get that high of a level. And that is a very, very big issue I have with that game, and I do not want to see this go down the exact same way. And something I do want to see, I want to see summons be something besides just their powers in combat. I mentioned earlier that they could mix those with the job class system. And as I was thinking about it, I realized I didn't elaborate on something in that. The reason I don't want them to do a separate job class system with a separate icon thing is because I feel like if the icons just give like flat boosts, it makes the icons feel less special, right? Like, let's say, compare the difference between, okay, the icons give you this specific weapon, like a Dragoon thing, or something else. and it has a very specific moveset, and you can get upgrades to it that are, again, very, very specific. Compare that to if it's a normal Dragoon and you can just get minor, like, if it's Shiva, like a little minor ice effects on the weapon, right? It's very much a different thing, right? And while it doesn't seem like that's that much of a big deal, I'm stuttering, because I don't script for this sort of thing. It would be very, not lazy, it would be very annoying if that was the route they went. But onto this, I want to see summons being more than just their powers. I don't expect them to be like, I summon this massive, humongous creature, and he just stomps on the battlefield and gets rid of everything, right? I don't want that to happen, because that was an issue I had with Final Fantasy 15. The summons weren't very often, right? And when they did, they would kill everything, but you didn't see them very often until they added Garuda from 14. At that point, you summon her every other fight, and she just insta-kills everything, right? At that point, it makes the combat even easier. But I do want to see them do something, whether they go the route of FF7 Remake, or they go the route of Final Fantasy 15, or they split the difference, kind of like Episode Arden did. I would very much be fine with that. But I want to see them be something besides just their powers. And another thing I don't want to see, I don't want to see excessive fetch quests. As much as I love Final Fantasy 15, and even 7 Remake had this issue for a lot of its quests, a lot of it are fetch quests, and I don't want to see that, which fetch quests would usually entail, oh wow, I get to secure that they'll be exploring, but I definitely don't want to feel like, okay, I'm at this point in the map, I need to go here, he tells me to go here, he tells me to go here, he tells me to go here. Now I have to go report back to every single one of these people, and then go back and get sent on a bunch of fetch quests. I don't want that, right? I would like there to be just really good, solid side quests, which I'm confident there will be, but I really don't want another fetch quest system at all. And the last thing I do want to see is I want super bosses. Final Fantasy 15 had technically some super bosses, like the Omega, Naglfar, Ayakishi, all these things, but the problem with Final Fantasy 15 is difficulty is scaled in that to not be based on skill, to be based on how many items you have. And they just kind of one-shot you, making it feel like, okay, let's just chip away with each passing death until I eventually get it. And it doesn't feel different until you get Armature Unleashed. And at that point, it's like, okay, I have a full combat system to work with now. And it definitely is a big pain in that, which again, I want to say, I love Final Fantasy 15. I do. I really, really do. But these are very big flaws with the game, right? There are times where you do feel like you're playing with half a combat system. And it kind of feels that way when you're fighting the main super bosses. Omega is better than others because he is meant to be beaten with Armature Unleashed. You're not beating him without it. So that's a very different case. But for the most part, a lot of the super bosses don't feel so good. So I would really like it if this game would do it. If this would take maybe some inspiration from the way Final Fantasy 15 does. It's DLC extra bosses, like Kingly Clash, Final Trial, Intensive Training, or Friendly Match, the extra fights that come after the DLC story. If it could take from that and just, hone it for that combat system, I would love that. Because Devil May Cry doesn't really have super bosses like that either. But I really want to see Final Fantasy 16 have those. I'd be very disappointed if it doesn't. And the last thing, which is something I don't want to see, I don't want enemies to be piss easy. I don't want it to be like Final Fantasy 15, where every single trash mob can just be incinerated instantly by just switching over to Gladio or with one magic spell. Magic is oftentimes, talked down in Final Fantasy 15 to be garbage or useless. But I'm going to go with probably not on that, because Final Fantasy 15 has a magic system that is hilariously overpowered. And it kind of makes the trash mobs be just that, trash mobs. I want the enemies in this game to kind of be like what Final Fantasy VII Remake had, where the enemies feel tough, but not completely unfair. And while 7 Remake, sometimes the enemies feel a little excessively tanky to the point where it does kind of just feel annoying. I would definitely just like to see some kind of, like, split the difference in it somehow, where the enemies aren't 7 remake tanky, like in normal or hard mode. Well, in normal, in hard it makes sense, but in normal, where the enemies just feel like they take forever to go down. I don't want them to be like that, but I don't want them to be completely piss easy like in Final Fantasy 15. So if they could split the difference somehow, I would be all for that. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know 5 things you do and don't want to see, or just some things you do and don't want to see. Let me know if you agree with what I said. If you think I said some dumb stuff, let me know. I say dumb stuff pretty often. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. My name is Carmen, but I go by Ellis on YouTube, and that'll do it. Y'all take it easy.